So first off, thanks, Greg. Thanks, Ken. I really appreciate this opportunity to be able to share some of my experience and my insights in my China sourcing. Just a quick intro. I've been based in Shanghai. I'm on the ground in China, and I've been sourcing from Chinese suppliers since 2008. So in the past, I've worked with multi-million-dollar sourcing campaigns, and more recently, I've been helping a lot of Amazon sellers and with a lot of their common sourcing problems, such as finding trustworthy suppliers, negotiating the right price for their products. So I'm very happy to be able to share some of my knowledge today. And I really like to keep this interactive. So I saw that there's a lot of good questions that are coming in. And also, if Greg or Gen, if you have any specific questions during the presentation, feel free to interrupt. So we can make this a home run for all of us. We can gain a lot of value. So
Perfect. Yeah, and again, I will kind of watch the questions coming in, guys. And I think Gary's gonna be sharing his screen with us, so he won't be able to see them. But Gen and I can flag them, and then when appropriate, we'll interrupt them and ask some of the more burning questions.
Perfect. So let's dive right in.
All right.
Okay. So okay.
And I'll start off just by saying Google Hangouts was doing this funny thing when Gary's trying to share a screen with us. So we know it's not in presentation mode, but I think everyone can still see it pretty well. So yeah, go ahead, Gary. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, thanks. So today we'll cover some secrets of successful sourcing, and we'll look at a couple of different strategies, tricks of the trade that I've learned over the years that I like to share with you guys, so you can really take your Amazon business to the next level. So first off, question: who wants to own a 7-figure Amazon business? I think some hands are going up. I can't see I can't see you guys, but obviously to get there, you have to climb the mountain to get up there. And then a lot of people are already there, but there's a lot of people that are still on the journey. So besides product research, which is very important, obviously using Jungle Scout, sourcing is a major challenge for a lot of you. So today I'm going to cover 4 key areas that can take your business to the next level by using these sourcing best practices. So first off, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to do something a little different that I think most people aren't really thinking about when they're sourcing. First, we're going to take a 30,000-foot view of Chinese culture and the value differences, because ultimately in China, it's a relationship business. And then before any business can be done, there has to be some relationship that's established before you can really be successful in business. And then we'll discuss the supplier selection strategy. Next, we'll learn about negotiations, or what I like to call you get what you pay for. And finally, we're going to take a look at quality control, or AKA the never-ending story. And then we'll end with covering some best practices and some free bonuses that I have for today's viewers. So if that sounds okay, let's dive right in. Okay. So first off, let's take a step back and look at Chinese culture, because Chinese culture and values are not the same. They're actually very different from Western culture and values. And this is actually the underlying theme that goes through all of the interactions that you'll have with Chinese suppliers. And then one of the main differences is the concept of guanxi. Greg or Gen, have you guys heard of guanxi before?
Briefly, I know a little bit about it, but I'm sure our listeners and myself would like to learn about a lot more.
Likewise. Definitely. Okay, so the literal translation is relationships or connections, but there's actually a deeper meaning that's very important to doing business with Chinese. And guanxi's elements include trust, respect, face, and time. So by paying attention to this, you'll build stronger, more trustworthy relations with your suppliers. So I think this is something that's very important for our viewers today, because finding trustworthy suppliers was the #1 question. So by building guanxi, by building these relationships, this will lead you to more business. And the benefits will include suppliers will be more responsive to your requests. For example, if you want to make any changes to your product after building guanxi, building relations, they'll be more accommodating to that. And they will be able to offer better pricing and better payment terms as the relationship grows. And if problems come up, they'll be more cooperative in fixing the problems, because ultimately, for Chinese, they're looking for long-term relationships, whether it's business or personal. They really want stability. And then if you play your cards right, they may even agree to exclusivity for these products. So you could be the only person on Amazon selling these particular products. So I won't go too in depth into guanxi today, but guanxi is just something important for you guys to be aware of as you're doing business with Chinese suppliers, because this will help you build trustworthy relationships with the suppliers. Building guanxi can be done whether visiting the factory, having a meal together, or even drinking. This will all build guanxi. I mean, ultimately it's the buildup of relationships, trust, and the time commitment, and also keep paying face respect to the factory. And then I was talking to one of my Chinese friends, and we were discussing what are the main differences in doing business in China versus doing businesses in other countries. And then they said that normally in the U.S., if we have a meeting, we get straight to the point, we talk business first. But in China, it's actually the reverse. We don't talk about business until we feel comfortable with each other. I mean, we may ask where you're from, what's your country like, or we may even have a whole meal together first before we even discuss business. So the concept of building relationships is critical for success in doing business in China. So next, let's look at the differences, the main differences in ethics and values between China and the West. So if you look at the two logos on the screen on the right, on the left is Under Armour, and a major American sportswear brand. I think Warriors fans, Steph Curry, he's a major spokesperson, so it's all over TV. But at the same time, on the right is a Chinese company that blatantly copied their logo and then released their own line of sportswear in China just a few months ago. So this is a great example of what is not acceptable in the West can be acceptable in China. This company called Uncle Martian blatantly ripped off Under Armour's logo and their colors, and they're actually opening stores, with the logo design that's very similar to Under Armour in China. So the key takeaway is that the Chinese suppliers' mentality is different from yours. So you need to be extra careful about copycats and your intellectual property in China. So don't assume anything. You must be very explicit in protecting your designs. Otherwise, they could end up all over Alibaba. So this is something that you need to pay special attention to when doing business in China. Don't assume anything. And then similar differences exist in transparency and communications. Often in China, suppliers will not inform you of any problems that come up until it's too late. So you really have to be proactive in anticipating them. There's actually a cultural background to this, because in China, it's actually bad to bring up problems because you're seen as the troublemaker. So if in the Chinese factory, someone mentions that there's a problem with XYZ product on the production line, they will actually be criticized, and then they may even be punished for bringing up these problems, because in Chinese society, stability and harmony is actually valued more. So ultimately, it's your responsibility to over-communicate and to anticipate these problems. I can share an example recently with one of the products that I'm sourcing. It's a fashion bracelet, And in the first order, we had it produced and shipped to the US. And then many of the customers found that the fabric, it was too rough against the skin. It wasn't very comfortable. So we asked the supplier in the next order to make it softer, and they agreed. But at the same time, they made the color 2 shades lighter than before. So the color became totally different. And then they didn't think to communicate this to me, and it was totally, I was totally in the dark until the product was almost finished. So the key takeaway is that you really have to be proactive, because the Chinese suppliers have different value standards and ethical standards when it comes to doing business in China. But there's one key similarity, is the desire to make money. The entrepreneurial spirit is very strong in China, and ultimately that's one of the everyone's on the same page when it comes to that, the desire to make money.
So, Gary, suppose you find somebody, your supplier, that does copy your product or sells your product to other sellers. Like, how do you enforce it, or how do you protect your IP if you have that, or from?
So first off, is this the supplier that I'm currently using?
Yeah, I mean, assume like, how would you protect yourself, basically?
Right. So if, for example, if I'm paying a mold or a tooling fee, then I own this design. So I would have this put in writing that because I paid the tooling fee, then the factory can only sell this product to me. For example, I helped a auto parts distributor in Brazil before, and then for all of their auto parts, they were these metal and rubber oil seals. They had their brand stamped on the part, and then at the same time, they paid for the tooling fee. So as we were placing the purchase order, we drafted an agreement that details specifically that XYZ supplier could only sell this product to our client, XYZ company in Brazil, and nobody else. So we had this put in writing just to make sure that it's clear. Because if you don't put it in writing, then don't assume anything. The supplier may bring this product to trade shows, and they may even show them to your competitor. So you really have to be vigilant. You have to be proactive to protect yourself.
Beyond getting it in writing, is there a way to enforce protecting yourself?
You would have to be extra vigilant. You would have to monitor on Alibaba. You would have to be proactive. I think it's similar to on eBay, with counterfeits in Louis Vuitton bags. I mean, eBay is not going to catch this unless you proactively tell them yourself. So you would have to be proactive against that.
Gary, one more quick question.
The other thing, sorry, Gan. The other thing is building the relationship. Going back to Guanxi, if they feel that you're a very grade A, high potential supplier that you have a lot of future potential business with, and especially if you build the relationship with the factory management and owner, then they're more likely to protect your trademark and IP. So again, it goes back to the concept of building relationships and Guanxi.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So let's move on. So next, let's look at supplier selection strategy. So when finding the right supplier, remember the 80-20 rule, the law of the essential few and trivial many, because there are literally over 1 million manufacturers, suppliers in China, but over 80% of the suppliers will be the wrong fit for you. So they may not make the right product, they may have poor quality or different quality from your requirements, the pricing may be off, or their service may be off. So your job is to identify and focus on the 20% that will be the right partners for your business. So how do you do this? So one tactic that I use is first I cast a wide net, I filter the fish, and then I go deep sea fishing. I dive deeper into the 20%. So first, I will request for quotations to a pool of qualified suppliers. I normally try to reach out to at least 20. And then I filter them based on their replies. So some triggers that I use to quickly filter out the non-qualified suppliers include suppliers that don't make the right product, if the pricing is way off, and if they don't reply you outright. I usually end up with a short list of about 3 to 4 suppliers that I will dive deeper into. And with these shortlisted suppliers, I'll then request samples, I'll go into further negotiations, and then we'll ultimately decide on the suppliers that we'll decide to work with. I know that Greg may have covered similar tactics in his case study, so I won't go further into too much detail into this unless Greg or again, if you have any specific questions.
I don't think at this time. I think some of the other questions I'm pretty sure you're going to cover in one of the further slides, so we won't interrupt you here.
Okay,
just to cast that wide net, is that like Alibaba or global sources, or do you have other suggestions?
Right. So I always say use the 80-20 rule, and Alibaba is the biggest online marketplace out there, so definitely look at Alibaba. But the thing with Alibaba is you have a lot of quantity, but you don't necessarily have good quality. So you really have to do your due diligence to filter the right suppliers. Global sources is good, I find, for a few key categories, including electronics and fashion accessories. I like to call them, I describe them as less but better, because their suppliers usually are, they're qualified, they're pre-qualified, and they also invest in attending their trade shows in Hong Kong. But you will not find as many suppliers on global sources. There may be some other smaller marketplaces out there, made in China and some others. I don't recommend using them because most of those suppliers can be found on the first 2 platforms. Looking further, if you have the time and resources, I highly recommend going to trade shows, either in China, such as Canton Fair. And other than that, I actually, if you have a particular niche, for example, if you're looking for pet products, I would actually recommend that you go to industry-specific trade shows, such as pet trade shows. And then I think a lot of our audience is in North America and Europe, and you can actually meet the Chinese suppliers at trade shows in your home country, because there will be major trade shows in the US and Europe. So you don't necessarily have to fly all the way to China to meet suppliers that way. So that's how I would cast a wide net. Okay.
Perfect.
All right, so let's move on. So one question that comes up a lot is, how do I tell factories from trading companies? So a couple ways. First off, I find that when I ask them directly, most of the time they'll tell me just outright. But if I get a wishy-washy answer, like we have a partner factory, that means that they're a trading company. Another tactic that I like to use is what I call the common thread test. So for example, a silicone factory, they typically will make silicone measuring cups, silicone baking sheets, silicone gloves, etc. So there's a common theme. It's the same material, so it kind of makes sense that they would manufacture this. But normally they would not manufacture stainless steel cups or stainless steel pans, because this would require totally different raw materials, different production line, and even different labor to make the product. So normally a manufacturer will have a common theme, common thread through all of their products. On the other hand, you do see some suppliers that sell everything under the sun. So for example, they may offer iPhone cases, power banks, or even selfie sticks. So if you see that, then they're a trading company. no supplier has the capability to make totally different products from different materials. So in that case, they're a trading company. Another way is to ask them technical questions, and normally trading companies, they won't be as knowledgeable when it comes to technical questions. And I can share this one story. As you can see in the picture, I went to visit this alleged factory when we were sourcing some battery-powered iPhone cases. And when I visited them, I asked the two ladies that were taking me around very simple questions about the battery life, about the charging times, and they couldn't give me a straight answer. They had to, they had to ask the workers in the factory. So in cases like that, they're not a factory, they're a trading company. They don't even know the technical capabilities of their product. So by doing this, you can filter out most of the trading companies from actual factories. Do you guys have any questions about this? If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me.
All right.
Okay.
No, I think you're doing a great job. Those are good tips. I know a few people earlier were asking how to tell the difference, so that should answer their question.
So
Okay.
is a trading company just bad because of that additional margin that you're paying for them as a middleman, or are you getting lower quality, or you can't like scale with them? Why would you just
Yeah.
cut them out right away?
Okay, so let's take a look. Let's take a step back. Let's take a look at the pros and cons of trading companies versus working with direct factories. Trading companies, in theory, they can offer better service. They tend to have better English skills. They tend to have more slick presentations, even a nice showroom that could be in the city rather than you having to go all the way out into the the outskirts to visit the factory. That's in the perfect world scenario. On the flip side, the cons could include higher price, obviously, but also you have to ask yourself whose side are they on when the going gets tough. If there's any quality problems, will they be on your side or will they be on the factory side? I can share several instances when one of my clients, before they came to me, they worked with a trading company in the past to source this product. But once problems arose, the trading company just conveniently went out of business. They just disappeared and they were unreachable. So you really have to look at the trust factor and also the credibility. Because I find that trading companies, they're more one-off. They're looking for one-off sales rather than long-term relationships. Where serious factories, if you can find them, they're looking for long-term partners because it makes more sense to do repeat business than just one-off deals. So that's my take on trading companies versus factories.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So let's move on. Okay, next, negotiating prices. This is another very common question when people are sourcing from China. So there's a Chinese expression called 一分钱一分货, 一分钱一分货. I don't know how many of you out there speak Chinese, but the translation is you get what you pay for. So in China, if something is cheap, I always question why is it cheap, because going back to the ethical standards and what's right, what's wrong, you may have heard stories in the news about counterfeit, like fake milk powder manufactured in China. A lot of babies were harmed. And there are a lot of companies out there, they're just willing to make a buck at whatever means necessary. So of course you're going to negotiate pricing, but price is important, but it's not the only variable. I mean, at the same time, for your business, you also need to consider your quality. You need to consider your payment terms, how that affects your cash flow, and also your delivery times. So my recommendation is, when you negotiate, don't just focus on price. Remember the whole picture when negotiating for your product. But at the same time, when you do negotiate price, be aware that there is a price floor. And if you go under that floor, the supplier is very likely to cut corners and your quality will suffer. For example, they may use a cheaper material without telling you. they may skimp somewhere else. So just really beware of that as you're going forward in negotiations. And I'll cover more of this as we go forward. So you might ask, when do I negotiate? Or when can I negotiate? It's actually an ongoing process. It's not something that's one and done. I know in the US, people don't really negotiate that much. I mean, I think it's mainly when you buy a car or if you're buying a house, and people don't really feel comfortable negotiating. But in Chinese culture, it's actually a lot more common, and in some cases, it's expected. So initially, when you're looking for these suppliers, you need to negotiate in the first place for a fair price. And initially, with the shortlisted suppliers, I will negotiate over email and telephone. But I'm not going to get the rock bottom price in the beginning, because that's not the main that's not the only important thing at this phase. So you first negotiate initially as you're shortlisting suppliers. So over time, as volumes grow, as you're placing your second order, your third order, for example, your first order, it may only be MOQ 500 units. Your sales are doing really well, and then your repeat order is 1,000 units. After that, 2,000 units. So as your volumes grow, you can negotiate for a lower price. And then I find that at least in the second order, I can get a couple percentage points off. With some of our suppliers in the second order, we had 5 percentage points off, and it's really a golden opportunity for you to try to negotiate. And when you negotiate, always keep in mind the guanxi, keep in mind the relationship. Email them and say, hey, our marketplace is doing really well. We're growing. We're looking for a long-term business, but at the same time, competition is out there, and we need to be competitive so we can grow bigger business together. So keeping that in mind, we need a target price of $299, for example. So keep in mind the big picture, the long game when you're negotiating price. One of the factors that I don't see a lot of people mentioning is external factors. So by this I mean especially the RMB or the Chinese yuan, the depreciation. Because in China, we're going through a slowdown in the economy. It's actually, you see a lot of department stores are empty, and the GDP is actually decreasing significantly than before. So the government definitely wants to encourage the economy to grow, and one of the levers that they can use is they can depreciate the currency. In China, it's a little different. The government actually controls the currency exchange rate, the Chinese yuan, the RMB against the USD. And then since last year, since September, we've seen a decrease of over 5%. So if any of you have been sourcing from your factories since before about September of last year, there's probably a 5% on the table that you can at least try to get some of that back. So you can definitely try to negotiate that. For example, big players like Walmart are really great at this. Anytime there's a small change in the RMB depreciation, they're on it just like that. They want to get those percentage points back, because when this happens, the US dollar is actually worth more in China. So that's why you can negotiate the price when there's external factors that come up like this. And finally, when problems happen and the supplier is at fault, you should negotiate for compensation. This compensation can be in terms of replacement products, replacement parts, or at least an order credit against future orders. And again, this is when the supplier is at fault. Of course, you shouldn't try to overly punish them, but at the same time, you should be fair and you should be firm when it comes to these types of problems. And what I do is I document all problems. If for example, people are finding defects with their product, I have them take pictures of it. I document what exactly is the defect, and then I show them the pictures outright to the factory. And then when they see it, a picture is worth 1,000 words. We needed this color, but because you had this problem with the dyeing, the color was off, and then we had a 10% return rate. So we use that as leverage when you go back to the negotiating table. So these are 4 instances that I negotiate when I'm sourcing from China.
Perfect.
Okay. Next. So in terms of pricing and when you're negotiating, how much should you negotiate? Um, Pricing strategy can be looked at in a number of ways. I'm only going to focus briefly on two of them. There's a cost-based approach where you take the landed cost and you multiply that to calculate your selling price on Amazon. And you can also make a reverse calculation based on the selling price to calculate your target price for the product. So normally I try to have at least a 3 times multiple of my landed cost compared to the selling price. So for example, if I land something in the US for $10, I want to sell it for at least $30 on Amazon. That's the bare minimum. I mean, for some of our products, we have a multiple a lot higher than that. But any lower than that, then you really have to look at whether the numbers add up, if it makes sense for the pricing. And you can do the reverse calculation and use that as a target price when you negotiate with suppliers. The second way to figure out how much to negotiate or a target price is to go back to casting a wide net and then go deep sea fishing. So what I do is first I send out the RFQ to a group of qualified suppliers, and then I 80/20 the results. So I'll take the lower range of the prices. Some of them may be way off. If you see a range of quotations between $3 and $5, and some suppliers are quoting $8 or $9 or even $10, you just eliminate them outright. And then I'll take the lower range of between $3 to $5 and use that as a barometer. So I'll use those prices to renegotiate the suppliers, the shortlisted suppliers, against each other. So these are two pricing strategies that I use when negotiating price. So next, how do I negotiate? So remember that the better your relationship or guanxi with the supplier, the more successfully you can negotiate. And then guanxi is built more quickly face-to-face rather than over a phone call or email. As I mentioned earlier, if you can afford to come to China to visit the factory, I mean, it really shows that you're getting skin in the game and then you're serious about doing business. So anytime there's a serious negotiations needed, I recommend making a trip to the factory to sit down with the owners to work it out. So a lot of times when things cannot be worked out over email or the telephone, you find that normally over email or telephone, you're dealing with a salesperson or not even the sales director. But by going to the factory, you're able to meet with the owner and then the senior management. So a lot of problems magically can be revealed when you go to the factory. And I know a lot of you don't have the resources to go to China, which is okay. I know everyone has time commitments, financial commitments. But one of the ways that you can meet with these suppliers that I find a lot of people are unaware of is that when there's trade shows in the US, there's trade shows in Germany, there's trade shows all over the world. And these Chinese suppliers, the serious ones, they'll actually fly to your home country. So this is a great way to be able to meet the suppliers face-to-face and then also immediately see the products and get your hands on the products and touch and feel them. And another benefit of trade shows besides meeting the suppliers face-to-face to build guanxi is that you can actually spot new trends before they hit Alibaba. So I find that a lot of new products debut at trade shows, and there's about a 3 to 6 month lead time before they're online. So if you're able to capitalize on that, that will really put you in front of your competitors on Amazon. So these are ways to negotiate. Again, the common theme is guanxi and the business relationship. The better your relationship, the more easier it is to negotiate. And I find that guanxi it's something that you really should try to take advantage of when doing business with Chinese suppliers. Okay, next, let's move on to quality control, or what I like to call the never-ending story. Quality control is another critical factor to success. And before we look at each step individually, let's take a look at the impact of quality problems and the cost of fixing them at each step. Because I outlined 5 phases of the sourcing process and how you should look at quality control, starting from supplier selection to placing an order, to monitoring quality control during production, to looking at quality after production, before shipment, and then finally to the shipment. And the cost of fixing problems are actually very different at each phase along the way. So if you look at this graph of the cost of fixing quality problems over the production cycle, let me just move that up a little bit if you can see it. So you can see that the earlier that you catch a problem, the less expensive it is to fix. So in terms of quality control. So if you catch a problem when you're placing an order, for example, hey, I messed up on the measurement. It should be 11 inches, not 9 inches when you place an order, and they haven't begun production yet. Usually it's pretty easy and it's pretty quick to fix that. But if there's quality problems that come up after production or even after shipment, after it lands in the US, then it's very expensive to fix. The worst case scenario is all the way to the right after shipment. So if you discover defects after they land in the US or even after you start selling them on Amazon, it's going to be really tough to fix these problems because the products are already in the US. You may have to get the product shipped from Amazon FBA back to you, and then you may even have to fix the problem yourself. And then if that's the case, you know, the Chinese supplier, they may be willing to send some replacement units, but that's going to take another month. And you're going to have to spend your own time and money to fix these problems. So that's the worst case scenario. If you catch the problems earlier, before they leave the factory floor, for example, after production, before shipment, here, if you arrange an inspection before you ship out, you can actually have the factory fix the problems before they leave the factory floor at their expense, on their dime. So this will save you a lot of frustrations and headaches. And I'll go through each step separately. So first, let's look at quality control in the initial supplier selection process. So when you're looking for a supplier, one of the main goals is to find the right quality match. I find that a lot of people ignore this, but as a best practice, one question that can quickly size up your supplier's quality capabilities and their experience with your market is what I call the country test. I will ask them, which countries are your main export markets? So by asking which country is their main export market, you can quickly assess their quality level. If they export mainly to the US or the UK, then they're more likely to have better quality than if they export mainly to developing countries, such as Middle East or Africa, for example. So there will actually be different quality standards among different factories, and you can tell this based on the country test. Also, be sure to get a sample before placing an order so you can see exactly what their quality level is. I mean, in China, everyone photoshops their pictures on Alibaba, so what you see online is definitely not what you get when you get the real thing. So definitely get a sample before you place a full order. And at the same time,
what's your experience with? Do you find that usually when a supplier sends you a sample that you find similar quality and the actual production?
That's a really good question, Greg. It depends. There's no simple answer because when they send you a sample, again, it goes to ethics and standards. Some suppliers, I find, they'll actually send a sample that could be from another factory, or they could even have bought off the shelf in a retail store. I mean, Chinese factories will overpromise. They can make anything. So it's important that you ask the right questions. Did you actually manufacture this sample? You know, you really have to, don't assume anything, Greg. Don't assume anything when dealing with these Chinese suppliers. Right. Another instance to be careful of is that when they make a one-off sample, it may be handmade. It may be made in a different way than a mass, like a full-scale production, like a lot of 1,000 units. Like, for example, if it's some sort of fashion accessory, they may have handmade it, but if they rather than taking it off the production line, And then a third difference to pay attention to, in my experience, is if they do send you a sample, sometimes the sample could be sitting in the showroom for months, if not years, and it could be rusty, there could be some problems. So it could be that the quality level could be actually lower than their actual production. So the key takeaway is you have to ask the right questions to make sure that this sample is indicative of the quality that you get.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like the country test too. I haven't heard that before. It makes total sense if they're exporting mostly to Western Europe or maybe Japan, the States. Those customers expect higher quality, right?
Right, right. And then also, you mentioned Japan. There's also differences between exporting to Asian countries compared to Western countries. If anyone is dealing with fashion or fashion accessories, if a factory exports mainly to Japan or Korea, their fashion trends are totally different than what you see in the US or Europe. So, I mean, their quality may be good, but it could be, not what your target customer is looking for. So I would even be more specific if you're selling to the US for fashion accessories or fashion items to look for, US and Europe.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so next, quality control when placing an order. It's important to define all of your product specifications, not only pricing, but also payment terms and delivery dates, and then have this in writing in your purchase order. By doing this, there's the added benefit of keeping the supplier on their toes and not overlooking anything with your order. In my experience, not to generalize, but a lot of suppliers are sloppy. So it's important that you keep the right records of everything, like all of your communications, and then a purchase order is a really good way to have everything in writing at the same place. So if anything goes wrong later on, you can refer back to this and say, hey, we agreed to this on XYZ date, here's it in writing. And then oftentimes they'll own up to that. And I will provide a free purchase order template after the presentation as a free bonus for our viewers if that's helpful to them.
Hey Gary, here's a question from Joni. Is it rude to would you come across as rude if you ask too many questions about the quality or the sourcing, or try and nail them down in writing?
What sort of questions? It depends. What sort of questions?
Well, you were saying like you want to make sure you're asking the right questions. So do you make it yourself, or
Right.
where do you export it? Things like that, where you're trying to assess their quality. Would they be insulted by that, or is that
No,
like?
I find that I always try to be fair, but firm. I'm not insulting them. I'm not saying, hey, your quality is crap. Why can't you do that? But I'm just trying to understand their capabilities enough so that we can do business together. And ultimately, that's what everybody wants. So I find that a good rule of thumb is to be fair, but to be firm. And no, I don't find that they find that it's rude at all.
Okay.
Okay, so once production begins, it's your responsibility to be proactive. So your goal is to try to catch problems as early as possible. So first, I recommend asking the factory for a pre-production sample before mass production. So this way you can catch and fix problems before full-scale production, after which it will be very expensive to fix. Pre-production sample is literally the first sample that comes off the production line, and then it's indicative of the quality of the rest of the production lot. And secondly, during production, I also ask for pictures and even videos so you can see if anything is wrong that's happening, so you can catch these problems during production. So again, going back to the graphic earlier, by catching these problems during production, it will be easier and less expensive to fix than after production. In my experience, after you place an order, expect the factory to be passive. They may have a lot of different orders they take care of, so you really have to be proactive. You really have to follow up with them. If the lead time is 30 days, I would try to monitor production, after 10 days or 15 days, just to follow up to see how things are going, and then to catch any problems as they arise. So you really have to be proactive in this case, because ultimately it's your investment that you're protecting. Also, focus not only on the product but also the packaging. I know a lot of you are having more premium packaging, so packaging is also another item that you should check quality control with during production. So after your order is completed, don't pay the balance just yet. Make sure you do some sort of inspection before it leaves the factory floor as a best practice. This is actually your last chance to have them fix it on their time. A third-party inspection agency is a great way to do this, and I recommend them especially for larger orders. Anytime you have order values of $3,000, $4,000 and above. And especially when working with a new supplier or a new product, because things are more likely to go wrong. Anytime it's a new relationship, people are still getting to know each other, what they like, what they dislike. So it's natural, the first order, there's more likelihood for things to go wrong. So just be extra vigilant. The cost for a third-party inspection agency is about $300 per man day. So this is an investment that's worthwhile, especially for larger orders. I'm going to share with you a trick of the trade if some of you can't or don't want to spend the $300 for a third-party inspection. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing, than blinding shipping the product to the US or Amazon. If you have a smaller order, you can ask the supplier to do a self-inspection. And what this means is that they can either send the samples to you or take pictures of them and take measurements according to your standards, just to verify that things are okay before shipping it out. Again, it's not the best case scenario, but it's better than nothing. I always recommend that you do some sort of inspection before releasing the final payment and shipping, because again, it's your last chance to have them fix it at their dime. If anything is wrong with the product, then you still have leverage for them to fix it because you haven't paid the balance of the payment yet. So definitely use that to your advantage.
You have some reputable third-party inspection agencies?
Yes. There's larger ones out there. There's multinational ones, including SGS, Bureau Veritas. They tend to be more expensive. They do like full-scale certification, especially for electronics, if you have something that's more higher end. If you're running more on a budget, there's one that we use called Asia Inspection. I believe they're based in Hong Kong, South China. They're a French company, and then they have very thorough reports as well. And yeah, so those will be the ones that I use.
Thank you.
Okay. So after your shipment is delivered, some people think you're done, but actually you're not done yet, because once the shipment is delivered and you discover problems, this is the most expensive problem to fix. So like what I said earlier, you may have to ship them back from the FBA warehouse to your house and fix them yourself. And in this case, if the supplier was at fault, I would advise that you ask the supplier for compensation, and usually this will be for the next order. So you can negotiate for some sort of credits or replacement parts for the next order. Something that I see a lot of people don't do, that a lot of larger companies do is have a corrective action plan. And this is actually a document that would detail how the supplier would prevent the problem from reoccurring, from happening again. So basically, it's something that would identify the cause of the defect, and then also the steps the factory would take to prevent this defect from happening again in a future order, and put it in writing. But at the same time, remember, don't burn any bridges. Remember Guanxi, if it is a good supplier, you don't want to burn the bridge. You still want to do long-term business together. I find that after we have good relationships, normally the supplier is willing to work with me, and they're willing, if there's any problems, they're willing to either compensate or offer replacement parts. So just keep the long game in mind. It is a relationship business. So by doing this right, you can rinse and repeat. As your orders grow, so will your relationship with the supplier, and then you'll be able to get better pricing, better payment terms, and quality. So you'll be on your way to that seven-figure business. So in closing, I'd like to quickly introduce 80/20 sourcing. So here you'll learn sourcing best practices through my free email newsletter. And then I also have some premium video content, private coaching, and full service sourcing services that you can find more details of at 8020sourcing.com. I like to think of it this way. You can do sourcing yourself, and definitely a lot of people have success doing that. But it's kind of like trying to get from New York to LA. You can walk there yourself, but it's going to take weeks. You can drive there. It could take several days, but you can also you can buy a plane ticket. You can fly there, and it only takes a couple hours. So ultimately, it's up to you. And then there's ways to fast track the business if you like to invest in yourself. And then finally, I'd like to thank all of you guys for joining today. I hope it was helpful. You guys have been great. And we'll have some more Q&A at the end, but first I'd like to leave you with these free bonuses that you can find on this special page I've created for Jumbo Scout viewers. I have some free bonuses with sourcing checklist, a request for quotation email script that you can use to save time when contacting suppliers, and also the purchase order template that you can use so you make sure you don't miss anything. And then you can sign up for my free email newsletter to get more information if this is helpful to you. So you can click on over to www.8020sourcing.com/Jungle Scout. And if you'd like to contact me, my email is gary@8020sourcing.com. So thank you, everyone. I hope it's been helpful, and I look forward to your questions.
Wow, that was excellent, Gary. We're getting a lot of great feedback in the chat as well. So first of all, thank you very much for that. I think there's a few questions about payment, and obviously some people are worried about this. Can you speak a little bit about what is typical to pay Chinese suppliers, what some alternatives are that may offer a little bit more protection and so forth?
Right. So payment methods is another common question that we get. It depends on a couple of variables. It depends on the amount of payment, if it's a big, if it's like a large order, or are we talking samples? Normally, for 1 or 2 samples, I recommend PayPal because it's fast, it's easy, and also the payment fee is a lot lower. So for samples, I recommend PayPal. In terms of larger orders, if you're placing a trial order, I normally recommend a wire transfer, a bank transfer, and definitely arrange payment terms of don't pay 100% upright. Like never, like if it's a large order, never pay 100% outright because you have no leverage against the supplier if anything goes wrong. So I try to negotiate for the first order at least 50-50, 50% in advance, 50% after inspection before shipment, or even 30% in advance, 70% after inspection before shipment. I've never used Alibaba escrow. I can't comment too much about it. I do know that some people do use it, but that would be my recommendations.
Yeah, actually, I use the Alibaba escrow service for the first time just a few weeks ago, and yeah, it works really well. It's easy to use. So yeah, if your supplier takes that, I recommend you trying that, guys, because it does offer you a little bit of protection.
Yeah.
Someone asking here about their supplier not taking PayPal. In my experience, it's fairly common for some suppliers not to take PayPal. Maybe I'd say 1 out of 3 won't accept it for your sample or your deposit or whatever. What's your experience with that, Gary?
In terms of PayPal?
Yeah, like what percentage of factories would you say take PayPal, or is it a red flag if they won't, and so forth?
I don't think it's a red flag. PayPal actually is not that common in China. It's mainly for exporters. I don't take it as a red flag at all. But PayPal, I do agree that it's useful for sample orders, for samples, for small amounts.
Cool. Let's see. Did you see some other questions again? Or do you have any?
Yeah, yeah, there were some questions. Kind of like we did a blog post that got a lot of comments about hijacking, where it's basically like Chinese suppliers who are selling a similar product,
Mm-hmm.
like that a private labeler would be selling.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned you want to like take precautions and be proactive about protecting your IP and get it in writing. But yeah, I did see more people were asking about like how you can um, not get your listing hijacked or not end up competing against your supplier, who will then go and turn around and sell the exact same product on Amazon.
Um, I do see a trend happening with Chinese suppliers beginning to sell on Amazon. I don't think it's a huge trend. It's a small initial outright trend. The reason is because there's actually a larger e-commerce market in China called Taobao or Tmall, and then the marketplace, like the barriers to entry for that same supplier to sell in China are a lot lower because it's the same language, it's the same country. It's a lot easier for them to sell on this marketplace before they have to go through all the bells and whistles to sell on Amazon. So I don't see that many suppliers do it, but at the same time, I went to a trade show recently where I found a product on Jungle Scout. It was a kitchen supply item, and then I was looking for that product at the trade show. So I had a picture of the listing with the brand name, and then it just happened that I found the same supplier that was selling directly on Amazon. It was the exact same name. They're like, oh, that's ours. And then they showed me the box. It was the same Chinese brand. So I'm like, oh man, I can't compete against that, right? I mean, nobody can compete against the supplier directly. So, so I wouldn't advise, if that supplier is selling direct on Amazon, I wouldn't advise using them for your product. I would try to find a competitor or even consider a different niche because, they have factory pricing. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. I don't have that much experience with hijacking. That's not my expertise, but that would be my recommendation if it comes to Chinese suppliers. What I'm seeing with Chinese suppliers selling on Amazon.
Cool. Let's see. What else do we have again?
So you mentioned trade shows were really good, whether it's in your home country or if it is worth it to go to China for it. Off the top of your head, some trade shows that people should be looking out for?
Canton Fair, obviously. I mean, the thing is huge. I know that Greg's been there. I don't like the Canton Fair. The reason is because it's like everything under the sun. It's like a zoo. And normally when I source something, I have a product in mind. So if I'm looking for watches, for example, I'll go to the watch trade fair in Hong Kong. If I'm looking for pet products, I'll go to a pet show. So I try to be more targeted when it comes to trade shows. Also, in the U.S., there's a lot of trade shows that I find that people underutilize. There's a pet show that goes on in Florida. There's the fashion trade shows in Las Vegas. So really, you can Google it. Everything's online. You don't necessarily have to come to China to meet these suppliers.
Hmm. So somebody was asking you about Alibaba's online sourcing specialists. Any thoughts on that?
I have an interesting story. I've only tried them once as an experiment, and then the same product that I could find on Alibaba for about $3-4, the sourcing specialist quoted me $11 for it. So I don't know if that guy was being greedy or what, but I mean that I only tried one person. So I mean, do your due diligence. Maybe do your own sourcing and then ask them to source also. It doesn't hurt to get another another voice out there. But I wouldn't rely only on them.
What about what are your thoughts on the different badges and certifications or whatever some factories will have on Alibaba, Gold Supplier and on-site check and this and that?
Gold Supplier is actually something that the factories can buy, so doesn't necessarily mean that they're better. I find that the number of years that they're on Alibaba as a Gold Supplier, I do take that into consideration because it does show it does show a track record versus someone that's year one. They could disappear overnight, like with that trading company that what my clients found. On-site check, it definitely helps, but I wouldn't, that's not something that makes or breaks the deal. I would look at the more holistic picture. I would gauge their responses, how responsive they are to my questions. Are they answering me, outright? Are they being wishy-washy in terms of their quotations? Does it make sense? I would look at their product line. Earlier what I mentioned, is there a common theme test? Does their product line make sense? Or are they selling everything under the sun? If so, then they're more likely a trading company. So there really isn't just like one badge that I see like, oh, they're good. It's like a whole holistic picture of the different variables that I take into account.
Excellent, great advice. I think we have time for one or two more questions, as long as you don't have to run, Gary.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
So, about geography, are there certain regions of China that specialize in certain products? And also,
Yes.
would it be better to look for factories kind of like along the coast or by the ports?
Right. That's a really good question. In China, there are what we call clusters, manufacturing clusters. So there could be, one town in Zhejiang province that makes umbrellas. Like the whole town, it could be 5 blocks long. All you see are umbrella suppliers. So the way that China's, economy was built after reform and opening is they just poured huge investment into certain areas. As a general rule of thumb, South China, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, they're very strong for electronics. They've been doing this for a long time. Those manufacturers have more experience because they got the first investment since the 1980s after Deng Xiaoping instituted reform and opening. They also have a lot of influence from Taiwan because Taiwan actually has longer experience in manufacturing, but because of the increased costs of labor and other costs in Taiwan, a lot of these Taiwanese manufacturers, they move their factories across the strait to South China, Guangzhou, and then these suppliers actually have better management, I find, and I mean not to say that Chinese suppliers are bad, but they did have a head start with the Taiwanese suppliers. If you look at another cluster around Shanghai, we call it Zhejiang, Jiangsu province, like Ningbo, for example, Yiwu. There's also a lot of suppliers and lower cost items. The quality level may be a little bit lower than South China, but you may be able to get some price advantages. But the key thing is to, if you're doing, as you're casting a wide net, you will find, trends. Like this supplier is from this town, that supplier is from the same town, from the same town, from the same town. Like, oh, that's a cluster town for this particular product. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also, the final point about that question is, if you go west, like further inland China, like for example, go to Chengdu, or there's lower costs there, but they don't have the same infrastructure, they don't have the same raw materials, the whole supply chain. And then another added cost for that region would be the increased logistics costs, like shipping domestically across China to the port could cost even more than shipping ocean freight from that port to the US. So with those type of suppliers, unless you have like a very high value item, like Apple's contract manufacturer Foxconn, they're in Chengdu, so they can afford to airship those iPads and iPhones to the US directly. But probably for Amazon sellers, that may not be a viable solution. So I would focus on, Guangzhou, South China, and also Zhejiang and Jiangsu regions.
Cool.
Excellent.
So Gary, I know this isn't exactly your specialty. We did a webinar with a freight forwarder a couple weeks ago. You can find it on our blog for all these people asking. But we've gotten so many questions about it. I feel like we got to just get you to say something about shipping and freight forwarding. Maybe you can just give us like a couple minute rundown, big picture overview of how it works.
Right.
Maybe some tips.
Sure. 80-20 rule. I think a lot of Amazon sellers, when they first start out, I would suggest you pick something that's not oversized or not anything that's too heavy. The main reason is so that you can airship it. Air shipping is a lot easier to handle than ocean freight. You don't have to deal with all the customs bureaucracy, going through a freight forwarder. You can, pay FedEx or DHL to ship it directly. Obviously it's more expensive, but you get the product a lot faster. Normally it arrives within a week from China to the US. And then this way you can get it on Amazon. It can be your minimum viable product. You can test it. You can get quick response whether you want to move forward with it. So for a lot of the sellers just starting out, I do recommend air shipping. If it's a larger item, if it's furniture, or even if it's an oversized item, then I would weigh the different options of ocean freight shipping just to make sure it's more economical. And of course, you also have to take into account the greater hassle of going through a freight forwarder. So it really depends. I always recommend that if people are starting out, they try to pick something easier so you can get some quick wins under your belt. That way you don't get frustrated, you don't give up. You'll learn. Everyone's learning. I hope everyone's learning today from our presentation, and yeah, that would be my advice.
Cool, excellent.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. Yeah, this has been fantastic, man. We do quite a few webinars. I have to say, it's definitely one of the best ones we've ever done. I think the audience agrees. We're getting tons of fabulous feedback in here, which is awesome. Before we go, I didn't warn you this or anything, so I'm going to put you on the spot, but if you had one takeaway for everyone to remember, what would it be? A little tip for everyone.
One takeaway. In China, don't assume anything. Just don't assume anything. Anything could happen. You're a supplier. Just try to protect yourself. Be proactive the entire way. Remember the graph. Try to catch problems early. And finally, remember guanxi. Ultimately, it's a relationship business. If they like you, if they see potential in you, like I like Greg. He's growing with every order. He's an A client. Factories will actually grade their clients as well. I mean, just as we're grading suppliers, they're doing the same thing to us. So if you can build the guanxi, if you can build a relationship, then they're going to show you special treatment. And I think you'll be on your way to your 7-figure Amazon business.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And for those of you guys, Gary was nice enough to put together all those free resources for us. So 8020sourcing.com/Jungle Scout, and you can get those. I know his email list has tons of other good information, so that's a good one to be a part of, so recommend that. Yeah, thanks again, Gary. It's been fabulous. Hope we'll catch up more soon.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Gary.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Bye.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.